Action Movie Dad here, and you're looking great today. My name is Daniel Hashimoto. You can also call me Hashi or simply Action Movie Dad. And welcome to my presentation called You Can Fake Anything in After Effects. It's true. In fact, one of my favorite quotes about this subject comes from Victoria from Adobe, who often mentions that she'd heard that After Effects is designed to do things it wasn't designed to do. And let's break into that a little bit. Now, I have been using After Effects for about 20 years to do lots of things that After Effects probably wasn't originally intended to do. Most notably, probably, are my YouTube videos of my child playing with, Nerf toys and doing all the standard stuff that kids do, playing The Floor is Lava. Anyway, you may have seen that. But, this is all child's play, but it's also all pushing the visual effects capabilities of After Effects. And there goes my kid off to have some playtime with his other friends. But a lot of that stuff is ancient history now. That's like 7 years ago, which in internet time is forever. And I'll have you know that my skills have improved a lot over time, and also I've matured a lot as an artist. Here is an example of some of the work that you may have been treated to. Who here hasn't wanted to replace famous movie characters with velociraptors? No one, right? Look at him go, oh.
Fool! No man can kill me.
So just pausing here for a second, it's clear that I like to make videos where you need to come to expect the unexpected. And I've found no better program for that than After Effects, the program that, as we'll recall, designed to do things it wasn't designed to do. And over the years, a lot like my journey as an artist, After Effects itself has matured a lot and added new features continually, making it more and more capable of the kinds of cool work that I like to do. Let's take this as a simple example. This is pretty similar to what I like to do. I'll take a very standard and kind of boring playtime and want to transform it into something maybe out of the movies. But this is a wild handheld shot. There's a lot of moving around and it feels like adding some depth and additional things to this would be a big pain. But with some amazing features like Roto Brush 2, it turns out that rotoing out a character even as complex as this running child is actually a pretty simple thing to accomplish. This is a very long shot, 10 seconds of roto, but it actually required very little input from me. Just 45 foreground strokes and 23 background strokes. And you've probably seen Roto Brush before. It's basically this tool where you quickly grab this brush and you can kind of like paint a character in, and After Effects is smart enough to try to select just this character. You can also hold down Alt and delete things that you don't need like that, and now you've got kind of this cutout character like this. However, there is a best practice for this that will give you much better results than wildly going in with a scribbly line. And let's start over just to show you what that tip is. The key word here is segmentation. It's trying to break up the character that you're rotoing into little bits. Like, I want the head to be one shape that gets tracked, and I want the body to be one. I'd also like this arm to be a bit of it, the forearm. I definitely want this cape to be a part of the equation. And as you can see, I'm just adding individual strokes on different parts of the body, like this. And the reason I'm doing it like that, even though it's grabbing some erroneous data over here, it means that it'll know that my foreground is made up of all of those strokes that I just made. Like this. And now I can hold down Alt and erase some of the erroneous areas, like back there, and it got pretty much all of that. I'll also grab this space in between the legs there, and you'll see that a couple of pieces of the body are getting cropped out, or this isn't doing the best job at this moment. It's missing its elbow there. But watch what happens now that we have all these segments ready to track as I step one frame forward, and After Effects can see what movement is going on. It makes a pretty darn good guess as to what the body shape is, including this cape. And now if I play along, a lot of those brush strokes are going to really do a great job trying to keep up with this character. And you can see it slipping up a teeny bit here and there, but honestly, this is an amazing result that you could roto out a full running handheld humanoid character in this little amount of time. It's remarkable. I love it. So as I said, RotoBrush 2, not an incredibly new feature, but honestly one of the most powerful ones if you give it a good shot and use best practices. Now, one of the really cool things about having a rotoed character like this is that it's a great opportunity for you to use the After Effects track matte options. Now you can pick any layer in the stack as your track matte. So on the original footage, let's turn that back on, I could choose my cutout kid as an alpha matte, and I could check this box to invert it. And now we have basically our footage minus the character. But wait, what's that, you say? There's this big black hole in the middle of it. Well, it's actually a transparency grid because it's, a track matte here. And one other very useful friend in After Effects is content-aware fill. I'll put fill all the way over in its own window right here like this. Now, content-aware fill has the option to show you the hole that it's going to try to fill in. It's going to try to fill in that hole all the way across the video like that. You've probably heard of it. But I'm going to alpha expand this out a little bit because you can see that there's some kind of motion blurry pixels around the edges and stuff like that we would really like to eliminate and have painted in. All I have to do then is press Generate Fill Layer, and through the magic of science, our character's gone now. After Effects has used the motion vectors of the original footage and done a pretty darn good job erasing this character almost all the way through. In fact, right here it kind of looks like there's a cool invisible character running through here. And on the subject of invisibility, one of the really cool things you could do after using these two pretty much automatic tools, RotoBrush 2 and Content Aware Fill together, is that you could take this lovely rotoed character like that and maybe turn their transparency down a little bit so you actually have a cool invisible character that you can actually see through. And already just something like this is a pretty impressive trick, and honestly, I think it looks really cool. It's unusual to be able to see through somebody that you're filming running around like this with a handheld camera, etc. One of the other cool things you could do is you could take this a step further using an adjustment layer like this, maybe throw it under your child layer there, and then add something like a displacement map. And on this displacement map, let's choose that super cutout kid, and we'll go to the luminance channels like this, and we'll crank up the displacement. And now what's happening is that on this adjustment layer, we are basically using the child as they're running as a displacement map for the pixels behind them, kind of a cool predator effect. So the more I turn up this effect, the more apparent it'll become. Look at this. Here we go. So here's just using some RotoBrush and some content-aware fill to create your invisible character. And in fact, if you wanted to play around with this a little bit, you could really try pushing the displacement to a far degree to get some really wild looking results. Or you could do something like use the amazing tool called Chromatic Displacement that comes with the Red Giant VFX suite. It's very similar to a displacement map, but it's better in my opinion, because check out what it does here. I can scroll to a frame like this and start to turn up the displace amount, and I will get this really beautiful chromatic displacement. You can kind of see this amazing watery looking thing. I'll turn it up to full quality so you can see all that beautiful warpy, watery, volumetric kind of shape. And also, on top of this, there's some chromatic separation in here among the colors, which is really cool. The same effect you'd get with a prism or something like that. And I love this because you can soften the displacement layer as much as you want within the effect, so you can get something like a really blobby look like that, or turn it all the way down for some really fine detail from your model. So again, what this is doing is it's taking the original cutout character and it's using that as a displacement map of sorts on the background element. And in fact, you could mix in your top layer like this a little bit, so you have maybe some color from your character, but you can turn up your displacement. Maybe let's soften this a little bit more. Let's turn up the displacement amount even more, maybe something like that. And it's something that's pretty unique and a pretty cool visual effect to get. Really cool, but there's still a lot more that we could do. So let's lose the invisibility thing, because we actually want to try to transform the space in here a little bit. And to transform the space in here, we're going to need to run a camera track. And one of the wonderful things about the state that we're at in this project is that we can camera track this empty background footage, and it's not going to have the child in the way to muck up the track. Now, hopefully a lot of you are familiar with the 3D camera tracker. Basically, you apply and analyze any clip, and what it'll do is it'll put a bunch of projected points that it tracks throughout your scene, trying to attempt to resolve what is the 3D nature of this piece of footage. And one of the ways that you can guide yourself through the system is by using these amazing guide solids. Like you can shift select these three right here, and that'll help define your ground plane. So I've gone ahead and created a bunch of planes on little areas that I think would be good to have information from. Now, because the After Effects camera tracker doesn't really know what the size of anything you've filmed is, everything is just sort of a guess, and as it builds this world, the coordinates and locations of all of these different planes can be some really wild and bizarre numbers. Sometimes they're really giant, and sometimes they're really small, and they can make it difficult to work with 3D layers within After Effects if you're used to that. So one of the things that I love to do is use this free script that I made with Joe from Workbench.tv. And all of the wonderful instructions and the free script are available here at this VFX side quest called 3D Normalization in After Effects plus free script. This free script is right here. And as you can see, it's this lovely dockable window right here, so I could take my normalized track and just nicely integrate it next to content-aware fill here. Maybe they can be, bunkmates like this. So it's a very small, nice, minimal interface called Normalized Track. Isn't that nice? And what it does is you can pick one lucky solid. In this case, I'm going to pick this one. And I'm going to designate it my floor. I'll designate it the floor by naming it floor, and then highlighting all of my 3D layers and pressing the Normalized Track button. And it'll look kind of like nothing really happened, but something did happen. This floor is now at the position 960 by 540 by 0, and its rotation is 270 by 0 by 0. And if you've ever done 3D compositing within After Effects, you know that that's the amazing perfect center of the universe whenever you start creating something, if you're working in an HD comp. And so in this case, this Normalized Track button has done something wonderful and made it so everything in this 3D tracked scene is relative to this ground plane. So if I were to create any kind of sample layers, like some text, and then turn them 3D with a 3D switch right here, that text is going to place itself right here, aligned with that ground plane. So will any 2D card or whatever that I bring in, like this, as a 3D layer, it'll plant itself right here in the middle. It's pretty cool, it's pretty handy, and a really good jump start if you're using any cool particle effects like particular, if you're just arranging 3D cards like this, or maybe using Video Copilot's Element. There are a million lovely things you can do when your data is nice like this. So again, check that out. It's the free Normalized Track script from Red Giant by me and Joe from Workbench.tv. And now that I have all these lovely stand-in cards here, one of the cool ways that I can start to do an environment swap, basically just the most low-rent version of one you could do, is to take these little squares and replace them with photos or something else that you want as your environment. I've been very fascinated by some of the cool generative art tools like DALL-E, so I decided to ask DALL-E to generate a photograph of a destroyed city street covered in debris. And that's pretty cool. It looks pretty photographic to me, which is specified by photograph there. And I also tried this destroyed house with blast marks and broken windows, debris, and street to generate this wonderful, unique building front. And now I can take a piece of art like that and start replacing these other 3D squares. And in fact, I've already done that using the location of this square and thrown in that piece of DALL-E art like this. And all I've done is added the little feathered mask around the edge, just so there's a little bit of blending there. It's a very cheap job, but what's kind of cool is that as soon as you press play, it does really start to come alive because we've got this nicely rotoed character in front of that building. It's clearly moving like the other handheld footage, and suddenly you're starting to actually get an environment replaced just using a big old flat card generated by AI. And now to work with that other piece of AI generated imagery we have here, I want to use this as sort of a ground card, like a texture, but it's all projected in this weird angle like this. So a very quick way to deal with something like that is to add the Distort CC Power Pin effect. And I'm going to turn off the effect for a moment, and then using these little 4 pins, I can just place them in a couple of spots on the ground, and I'm going to place them around, so I'm basically tracing out kind of a squarish area from it, something like that. I like that you can just grab little bits like this, and that's sort of the ground in perspective. And now I can turn the effect back on, which is going to look weird at first, until I check Unstretch. And then it's going to look even weirder, because now you're going to have this weird thing like this. Who knows what this even is? But what's actually cool about it is if you bring it in as a single comp to something else, turn it 3D, and then put it flat like this, suddenly you've got this kind of 3D ground plane in perspective, which is kind of cool. It does need a little bit of feathering, and so I would recommend doing something as simple as adding a circular mask with some feathering on the edge. And now you can see what I've done is I've taken that debris card, kind of like this, and I've placed a bunch of copies all over the ground. And I know where the ground is because I used that normalized track script right here. So it's not the most fantastic job, again, but the whole point of all of this stuff is to show you that you don't need to do the most tremendous work because all of it will come together as a big, beautiful whole in the end. Now, one of the oldie but goodie features of After Effects is that if you have a bunch of 3D cards like this, you can select them all and then pre-compose them. And now you can see all of those layers have been pre-composed, but where did they go? Oh, I wanted to see all of my layers. Actually, all you got to do is settle down and go over here to the pre-collapse switch right here. Once I click that, After Effects is now making this one layer represent all of these 3D layers out here, and isn't it wonderful to see? You can just have one layer that is all these 3D ground plane layers. So now we've got this combo, we've got the wall here, we've got a ground plane kind of coming in. But Hashi, you say, this ground plane looks kind of like garbage, and it is. You'd be right, it's garbage all over the ground. But probably what you mean is that it does not look very good. It's clearly just a big flat plane. So what can we do to maybe enhance this using After Effects' built-in capabilities? Well, I'm going to do something crazy. Let's duplicate the layer. And then maybe let's go to a fast box blur, something, fun like this, and just blur the ground a little bit like that. And what we're actually going to do is not use this blurred copy of the ground, except for as a reference for the other ground. So let's turn it off. Then let's go back to our original flat looking ground. And then we'll go and say, let's distort this using a displacement map, just like we learned about earlier with that invisibility trick. And we'll select the ground card, and we'll say Effects and Masks. And notice that I've picked the layer above, the one that has that blur on it. And the reason I did that is because if I check the luminance values for these two things, let's set the horizontal displacement to 0. We want that to stay at 0. But on the vertical displacement, this is where the magic is. Since we are referring to a copy of itself that is blurred, as soon as I turn up the vertical displacement, what I now have is displacement going on based on the luma values of this card. And it looks like this weird 3D kind of extruded sheet with a bunch of little bump maps on it or something like that. And because they are both translating in 3D and reacting to the camera, as I play through this, you get the illusion of depth. The illusion of all these little rocks and crags and stuff like that on the ground out of this really lousy ground texture. And I can't tell you how happy I am to see weird little hacks like this, to see this 3D looking ground plane. And what's really cool about this is because it's a displacement map, it means that if I go to the displaced layer, this one that's hidden right here, if I turn up the blur amount, naturally you get a smoother ground plane. You can get this nice smoothed out kind of very big swaths of up and down. And if you turn the blur radius way down to like 0, what you start to get is this interesting effect where if you exaggerated the vertical displacement like this, you start to get this thing that looks like water, which is crazy. And it's all being generated from this crazy displacement map on top of itself in After Effects. Now, what would be really cool is if you had a foreground layer like this kid. If there were someone out there that made a cool plugin called, like, I don't know, Reflection or something like that, where all you had to do was maybe define a ground plane and a direction for a reflective layer like this, and maybe you could mess with the softness of it a bit so it kind of would get blurred out. And maybe if the engineers had thought ahead to make it so you could use one of the ground cards as a displacement map for the actual reflection, so it looked like it was reflecting in the water too. I mean, if there were any amazing company out there making cool plugins like this, so you could have this like interactive water thing. But I digress, and I'm moving off topic. So let's get rid of that reflection effect here. Let's go back to our ground card and adjust its blur radius back to maybe around 10. That felt like a very sweet spot for the displacement on the ground when it was set to a healthy number, like let's try 25 to begin with. There we go. 25 is a nice lumpy bumpy simple ground plane like that. I love it. And now when we get to the end here, this trampoline has really kind of taken me out of it. It's a very playful object, and it doesn't really fit the aesthetic of, you know, ground debris and a blown out building kind of thing like that. Let's try to replace it with something else. And because the camera's moving so much, I really wish I could bring in something like this piece of debris from Cinema 4D. It's a little photo scan of this car, not very high quality or anything like that, but it would just be nice because it has a little bit of depth to it. And in fact, I already have the ability to do this by creating a new solid. I'm going to call it Mirror because I'm actually going to use the cool effect called Trapcode Mirror on it. Now what Mirror does is it generates this little fractal field that's 3D. And usually I would use this fractal field for something like motion graphics or something like that. It's kind of weird, and you might open it and not really know what to do with it. But one of the cool things you can do right away with it is switch from this self-generated plane to a 3D model. Here I can click on Choose 3D Model, Add New Model, and go and find that saved Cinema 4D object. I'll hit OK, and now you can see that we've got this 3D car, well, this white 3D car brought into the scene and being tracked along with everything. Now back over in Cinema, we had a texture for this, and in fact, I can bring in that same texture card here. It looks really ridiculous because it's from a photogrammetry model, but if I drag it down into my comp here like this, I can actually then hide it like that. Go to my mirror layer and say, Mirror, please, for your texture, look at this car texture small layer. And suddenly, we're starting to go places. Under my 3D model settings right here, I can click this very handy dandy Create Null, and you'll see that it's created a null. Perhaps you might have expected that already, I guess. But I'm going to alter the anchor point here by just like moving the model up a little bit so it feels more like it's resting on the ground. Let's try the number 100. It feels like that seems to be the magic number for where it's on the ground. And I'm going to grab a location way back here by this trampoline. I think, as I recall, we had actually tracked in a couple of different 3D cards way back here. So let's grab the position of this diagonal one right here, just the position, and let's paste that onto this null object. We'll paste it like that. You can see that it's gotten very small, and in fact, I need to scale up this 3D null now, and now we've got a lovely car. And Mirror exists on its own layer that I can drag down here behind the kid layer, but above the ground layer. But even though the color balance and everything like that are very off in this moment, what I want you to recognize is that we've brought in 3 different levels of 3D assets in here using After Effects tools. We have this simple 2D card that was generated by AI that is standing in for this building right here. We have a whole collection of 3D cards that are being pre-comped and then displaced by themselves, by their own luminance channel, to create this 3D rocky ground effect. And then we have an actual mirror layer of this car back here being brought in. And all these 3 elements came together pretty quickly. And without doing much work, I could just dive in and add some simple like contrast to the ground to make it match up with this car a little bit better. And I think that brings the contrast of the scene up a little bit. And if I wanted to, I could use something like Magic Bullet Looks, on top of everything. Just one of the amazing color correction tools. It's sort of like applying a LUT, but you can customize it and bring in all different kinds of effects if you like. Throw on some letterbox bars. The fact that we've been able to go from this shot to this within the span of this session, including rotoing a character and replacing the background and everything like that, I'd say that After Effects is pretty amazing at doing this kind of crazy visual effects work that you could do with some lovely footage of your own kids having fun, and who knows, if you put a teeny bit more time and effort into them, maybe you could make some really cool ones on the YouTubes or something like that. So that was pretty fun. Now, as a reminder, we're here at Adobe MAX, where I shot this lovely piece of footage just outside, and I'm talking about some cool things that you can do in After Effects that After Effects wasn't designed to do. And here's one thing that After Effects definitely wasn't designed to do, because in fact I enlisted the amazing Nate Lovell from NT Productions to do this one for me. It's another free script, so that's 2 free scripts, count them. They're available right here. That normalized track script is available at normalized track here, and this other bit.ly link is called 3D Stamp. And what is 3D Stamp? Well, I'm about to show you. Now, earlier today I showed you how you can use our amazing free normalized track script to orient your world so it's perfectly aligned, so things like these Adobe MAX letters are right there, this ground plane is right here. But one of the things that I've always wanted to be able to do in After Effects is, this is a lovely stand-in for this ground plane here, but I've always wished that I could somehow use the texture of what's right below it on this surface. That would just be helpful for me anyway. And that's exactly what the new 3D plane stamp tool does. And it actually snuck in here when you weren't even looking right here. It's a lovely free script, dockable just like the normalized track script, and it's as simple as this one button. All you do is highlight a 3D layer and press stamp. Now the magic happens pretty darn quickly, and what has happened is the original solid has been hidden and replaced with an exact replica of the texture from whatever frame you exported on. So check it out. Now we have a properly tracked solid that is actually the real texture of the floor right here. So we can use that as a stand-in. So if I were at my custom camera view, I can see that piece of the ground and I can move my camera around and do this. In fact, you could create a whole bunch of different stand-in planes and place them all over your scene, kind of blanketing it like that, and then maybe grab them one by one like this, find a frame where your full card is showing like this, and 3D plane stamp that layer. In fact, you could stamp every single plane, and I've actually done that already. And right here, what we have is not the footage that I shot, but a 3D reconstruction just from all of the stills pulled from all of those cards. So check this out. Now I have this crazy representation. I could jump to my custom camera view, and it's a little bit wonky, but the whole idea is it's a very simplified camera projection tool, and so now I have this lovely set of PNGs making up this 3D scene, and I have my tracked camera. So if I wanted to place in any 3D objects or anything like that, you can see that my stand-in objects are right here. The great thing about them being these 3D stamped layers like this is that if I add any other 3D layers to my scene, like this one that says text, first of all, it'll go to a nice location right in the center of the ground plane like this, but it's going to properly interact with all of these 3D layers, which is pretty cool. So I can move this down through the ground or up here, make it bigger so it's going through there, and then push it back through the Max logo. And obviously there's a little bit of work you could do here, but it's such a fast and helpful tool. So please do check out this amazing 3D stamp tool. And even though we've been talking and talking, I'm still interested in showing you additional things in After Effects that maybe you didn't know how to do. So let's start with this 3D tracked scene. You'll remember we've nicely tracked it, and we know where the floor is, and everything's oriented nicely because of our normalized track script. And let's add a new solid to the top of all this. Let's do that. And I'm going to add a mask right off the bat, just to the top, right like this. and you'll see why in just a teeny bit. And then I'm going to add one of my favorite effects, which is right here under Noise, Fractal Noise. It's just some good old fractal noise. We love it. But what I'm going to do then is I'm going to also add some color correction, Colorama. Colorama is going to take the input phase of all of the intensity of that black and white and change it to this output cycle. It's actually a very wonderful plugin. It's an old OG kind of plugin, but I love it. You can phase shift, get some cool reactions and things like that. What I want is just a healthy balance of colors, maybe something like this. Why, you ask? Because then I'm going to drop the ball with CC ball action.
CC ball action.
Now, how many of you are familiar with CC ball action?
CC ball action.
You know, I realize this is the recording and you can't answer me in person, but just shout it out loud in your room and we can feel social for a moment. CC ball action breaks up that image into an array of 3D balls floating in the air and reacting to the 3D track camera. And this is wild to me because this has always been hidden in the background of After Effects. And if you haven't had the occasion to use it on one of your crazy MoGraph projects or simulating an LED board or something like that, now is your chance to set these particles free with a scatter tool. And that's too many. Let's make the grid spacing a little bit bigger, and let's turn the size down to something like this so it looks like a lovely Wonder Bread box. I'll turn off my floor, turn down my scatter a little bit, and then I'll just press play, and you'll see that we have this lovely all in After Effects 3D effect. We've got the 3D track camera creating this CC ball action
CC ball
thing, which is just lovely and kind of pretty. And you could do more with CC ball action than just create colorful dots like this. You can change the size of them. You also have an ability to control the instability state, which is basically like saying the evolution of their random scatter. So you could animate this over time and suddenly have animated things like that. You could also play with the built-in tools like the rotation axis, where you can just rotate the whole group of them around like that, around the x-axis, or twist them around a different axis down here. But basically what you've got is this really interesting native particle system. So for example, one thing you could turn this into is a lovely array of glowing particles or a little glow fairy magic. I mean, add some pixel motion blur and you can start to get some really decent effects like this, maybe generating some embers or something like that if you wanted to. Or perhaps something less pretty like this swarm of gross bugs swirling around through the air in 3D. I mean, who here hasn't needed to add a swarm of disgusting flies to a still photo to give it some life or something like that? Anyway, just kind of a cool thing that you could do with After Effects. Or you could actually layer it up with a whole bunch of other effects and end up with something crazy like this, just using the built-in After Effects tools. In fact, you could watch some of my other tutorials where I go down the rabbit hole of creating some of these other things that After Effects definitely wasn't designed to do. If you're ready for the challenge and to explore and find out all the amazing things that After Effects can do, I say go for it. Find my help along the way. Grab these free tools and all of the amazing free training here at Red Giant and on the Maxon Training Team channel. And perhaps you one day will be able to provide the internet with what it is sorely lacking right now, which is content. Just lots of very, very tasteful, amazing, difficult visual effects content.
CC ball action.